Hey, discerned listeners, this is the final chapter in our deep dive on the psychology of JonBenet Ramsey, which includes the psychology of a lot of aspects of this story. Take it away, Berto.
Drum roll, please. Okay, so there was a grand jury convened for a year. The grand jury convened for a year to decide what to do about the case. Okay, so what we're going to watch here is the district attorney announcing what's going to happen after the grand jury, again, spent about a year deliberating.
No charges have been filed. The grand jurors have done their work extraordinarily well, bringing to bear all of their legal powers, life experiences, and shrewdness. Yet I must report to you that I and my prosecution task force believe we do not have sufficient evidence to warrant the filing of charges against anyone who has been investigated at this time. Under Colorado law, the proceedings of the grand jury are secret. Under no circumstances will I or any of my advisors, prosecutors, the law enforcement officers working on this case, or the grand jurors discuss grand jury proceedings unless ordered by the court.
Okay, so basically he's saying in a face that he likely practiced in the mirror in the morning to look very serious and firm that there was not enough evidence to point at any individual as a prosecutable perpetrator of the murder. And he's also announcing that none of us are going to talk about what happened behind closed doors at a grand jury, which is normal. But you can have jurors that will blab.
Right. So after a year-long grand jury investigation, the DA announced that the results of that investigation lead him to not prosecute anyone. There was no trial.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense given what you've told me so far.
Right.
Is that there's just not enough on anybody. Everything is so circumstantial.
Right. So even, because, you and I, we're talking about our theories and I think this, I think that. But if a set of people that we were going to maybe listen to had access to all the police information, because we don't, right? We don't have access. And they had time, a year to deliberate and things like that. They're the ones we should maybe listen to. And if they're coming back saying we don't know.
That doesn't say that anyone's innocent.
No, of course not. Something did happen. Someone died.
Having said that, the cops did flub it. We know that to some extent.
Right. If any group of people had something that I might listen to is folks looking at all the data for about a year. Now, it doesn't mean they're not going to have their own biases. We've seen plenty of wrongful convictions anyways. And plus, this would have only been an indictment, not an actual trial. In 2013, however, there was a lawsuit. There was a lawsuit where the Daily Camera and the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press sued to get access to the grand jury's information. And it turns out that they had voted to indict the Ramseys.
Wow. What?
Yeah.
Wow. Is that normal for the prosecutor to deny the grand jury's finding?
No. It is not normal.
What the fuck?
Yeah. Okay, so here's what happened. So a judge unsealed, because of this lawsuit, a judge agreed to unseal portions of the record showing that the grand jury had voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on 2 counts each. You'll see what the counts are. 1, child abuse resulting in death, and 2, accessory to a crime. So it wasn't murder in the first degree. It was child abuse resulting in death and accessory to a crime. That's what they voted. Now, the DA will claim, because of course this was a huge kerfuffle, right? Wait, what? So 2 things. First of all, the DA will claim, well, yeah, that doesn't mean that I felt that I had enough evidence to convict. And a lot of critics will say, oh, it's these DAs. They want to have their record intact because if they go to prosecute and it fails, it counts against them as a... But it isn't apparently usual that the grand jury will recommend that the DA will It doesn't mean it can't happen. and I don't have the stats, but people, and it was a big scandal. It didn't look good too. And there was also this narrative of like, the DA was always on the Ramsey side. Remember, the cops were like, it's them. The DA was like, I'm not so sure. And then the grand jury says, yeah, let's indict him. And the DA goes, no. And so, and there's the whole money part. It didn't look good. It did not look good. The grand jury got to see all the data we logged, plus everything else that the police had. And in their conclusions, they thought that there was abuse going on. So, they didn't go as far as saying like, oh yeah, it was a premeditated murder or anything like that.
Are we privy to the data that they were basing the claim of abuse?
No, all the data is not unsealed. And even the whole thing hasn't been unsealed. The grand jury.
So if there is data that we don't know about, then okay. But if there isn't, and they were just guessing based on what you and I know, then if I was the prosecutor, I would also not indict, because I'm like,
right.
You're
Also, did they even hear any evidence of the intruder theories?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out they did. The Lou Smith or whatever, the Sherlock Holmes guy, he asked to present, and he was able to present to the grand jury, and they just didn't go along. And when interviewing an anonymous grand jury member, he mentioned that there were too many holes in the intruder theories, and they didn't have any likely suspects.
Well, just add another detail to this story that would compel people to be obsessed with it 30 years later.
Right. Even worse, by the time the indictments were unsealed in 2013, the contemplated counts, can you guess what might be an issue?
What?
Statute of limitations.
Oh.
Because it's not murder, right? Murder is not, I don't think, expires, right? Colorado law gives 10 years to bring most child abuse prosecutions. So the resulting in death from child abuse, that had expired. So even if at that point someone would have been like, what? Fine, let's prosecute. It's too late. It's too late. If you were hoping to get a trial, it needed to be done back then. So even by just like a delay, this was 1999. So the delay would have had to be significant, but it wasn't a delay. It was basically, we're not going to prosecute. So time went on. And the only reason we even found out is because of this lawsuit. And by then, statute of limitations, it didn't matter. It's very intriguing, very interesting.
I will say, what a coup that the prosecutor got away for so many years with giving the message of, hey, y'all, there's nothing to see here. Let's move forward. And he could control the narrative. And he probably was, or at least influencing the process to tell the grand jury, if you talk about this, then big consequences, because that's against the law or something. And he just got his way. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I guess we don't know. But
and he spelled that out too. Like now, watching that from knowing what we know, like he was so careful with his words.
Yeah.
If you watch it back, he never said, oh, they're exonerating the Ramsey. He's just like, we have no evidence to indict, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, like, and all of this is sealed and no one can talk about it unless a judge says so.
Yeah. It's like, why would you be that, well, who knows? But I mean, I was assuming it was because they did it. They knew that people were speculating based on little information. And so they're just like, you're not going to get that information. So give it up.
Everyone assumed that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think maybe there were people going like, I don't believe it. But from what I could gather, the general consensus was, okay, well.
Yeah. And this is why conspiracy theories exist, because people have actual examples of a conspiracy. In a sense, this is that, right? It's a cover up of us in a sense.
Yeah.
Now, it's possible that the prosecutor did have an understandable, reasonable reason to not follow the recommendation of the grand jury. But the problem is if it was legitimate and it was solid, because that's one possibility, if he were to come out and say that, okay, here are the findings, this is what the grand jury, and they recommended to charge and indict. But when I and my team look at all the evidence, we don't agree with the grand jury's findings because we know how things actually work in trials, and we tried to explain that to the grand jury, but you never know. Sometimes people just, they had a different take. But we thought long and hard about this, but it would really be a waste of energy and money and time, and would unnecessarily drag a lot of people through the mud.
Right.
And we are 100% sure that this is not going to result in a conviction. And so we're going to go back to the drawing board, really, and we're going to continue investigating. But if that was the case, if he said something like that with that stern face that he practiced in the mirror in the morning, then people wouldn't have accepted that. So there's a chance that he knew he had to essentially deceive the public, or he's fucking shady as shit and he's trying to cover something up.
It's both possible. Now, he has come out, because he's no longer the DA or whatever, but he's come out in interviews and stuff and stated basically what you just said, which is, look, I stand by my decision. I don't think we could have gotten a conviction, blah, blah. It makes sense, but on the other side, it's like, damn it, but there's no other credible suspects at this point. And these people, with all the access to the evidence, felt that at the very least child abuse was happening.
But given all the other things, you could see a tainted grand jury about the child beauty pageant thing. The grand jury is a jury of the community.
Yeah.
Look at the community in terms of the way that they're talking about this case. Could we imagine it being oddly voting? Could we imagine a grand jury being mistaken? Could we imagine the average group of people? Now, we would say, well, but they're coached on how to think in these situations, how to listen with an open mind and look at the data, not based on gut feeling. They are given supposedly a lot more information than we have, but we don't know that. They might have been given less information than we have, actually, because back then they might not have known everything. So could we imagine a grand jury being wrong? Yeah. Could we imagine a grand jury being right to recommend an indictment? Because they're not saying guilt. They're just saying there's enough. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt, right? It's just like, is there enough reason
to indict? It's not a trial. It's,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just all over the board. We'll never know, because this guy did a cover-up, essentially. All right, let's take a break. When we get back, more stuff. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, back from the break. Take it away, Berto.
Yeah. All right, so do you remember our favorite housekeeper, Linda Hoffman-Pugh?
Yeah.
So she wrote a book that she never finished. She never published it. And it was called Death of an Innocent. It was her accusing Patsy. And there's a lot of details here. Now, it's just her word, but there's a lot of details. Early, like I think in the first chapter, in one of the early chapters, we were talking about how, unlike the Menendez brothers case, we didn't have all these accounts of like, oh, I saw the father hitting JonBenet, or, oh, the way that the mother yelled at her at that one pageant. That said, there was one person that did have these kinds of accounts, and that is the housekeeper. You brought up a good point. Was she always going to bring up these accounts, or did she only bring these up because Patsy started throwing shade her way? Hard to know.
Meaning that there was an implication, at the very least, that it's possible that she or her husband or someone killed JonBenet Ramsey.
That's right.
And so
And
she might feel compelled, consciously or unconsciously, to say, it's not me, it's another. In fact, it's Patsy, because she's implying it's me, that kind of.
Because the day of, with the interviews with the cops, the only person that Patsy pointed at was, and not saying I think it was her, but kind of in a way, saying that the housekeeper had access to the house, knows the house, had asked to borrow money. So, now granted, cops ask you, do you know anyone who might have kidnapped your daughter? So, I mean, what are you supposed to not mention things that you think might be? You could see it from both ways. There's something else that John Ramsey said to Detective Linda Arndt when he brought the body up. And this isn't something that she said in an interview years later. This was all written in her official report. When he came up, he said, this has to be an inside job. No one would know about that room. This has to be an inside job. John Ramsey said that. Now, is he right, wrong? Who knows? But he said it. And that to me raises a couple of interesting thoughts. Because if it was him, if he's the one who did it, that's some three-dimensional chess he's playing.
Yeah.
It's got to be an inside. What does an inside job mean?
Well, it is, I think, him saying this has to be someone that knows the family, has been in the house.
Like a housekeeper.
Well, like a friend or it's just
Right.
someone that knows. Like,
So-
how would they know that
Right.
there was that nook or something? But,
So either John is actually really honestly,
unless it was
in
like
the-
a secret door or
Right.
something like in Dungeons and Dragons, it's, not strange to
It is
think.
hard to find, and it was, but still,
we saw the video. It didn't look that hard to find.
Right. It wasn't. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes they make it sound like there was this labyrinth underneath.
Yeah, it was just at the end of a hall,
Yeah.
and it was a concrete room
Right.
and there was like a little nook behind. So you could see someone.
So
But
actually,
if anything, it just points away from the father.
So you
for
could
him
see
for
that.
him to say something like that.
that's true. You could see it from that perspective.
Or he's trying to throw people off the scent.
I could see it again, like everything in this case.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, if he was actually totally in the dark at that point of the story, but he was maybe starting to have inklings, he might be like, this has to be someone in the inside, because right. And he says this to the cop. On the other hand, you're right that he could be doing a double to see you or something.
The other thing is, if he didn't do it, for him to hypothesize at that point, if he didn't do it, he's traumatized. He just found the body. He's not a genius. He's not he's not an investigator. He doesn't know. He's just randomly saying something based on, he's like, trying to figure out who did this to my child. For him to just say something it's not an indicator of anything, really, right? So, we just don't know.
But it is intriguing. Okay, so back to our housekeeper. So here's some of the specific things she wrote that are, in my mind, interesting. Okay. She says, first of all, that she recognizes Patsy's voice and handwriting in the note. Now, you could say, whatever. But, she points to certain use of words, the use of the accents over the E, because she was always very particular with JonBenet's spelling and always making sure the accent, the thing. Okay, maybe. But if other people, I don't know. It's just because of the attaché thing, you're like, it's kind of interesting. But she points that out. And she says that she also sound like she could hear her voice. Okay. Another thing is that Patsy had asked her, or like basically Patsy had confided that she did not enjoy having sexual relations, especially oral sex with John. Okay, so Patsy had asked her for advice in this regard and asked her if she had any suggestions. She wanted to enjoy sex with John, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Okay.
So what's the implication?
The implication, and she says that Patsy appeared desperate. So the implication is that their relationship's not going well. Right? Or at least not sexually, let's say. Sexually, they might be having some problems.
Okay. And what's the implication from there? Is this back to like, well, if he's sexually frustrated?
No, because she's not accusing John.
Okay.
She's accusing Patsy.
So
she's saying that she was getting desperate in her relationship, that she was frustrated about her child. She accuses, or she says that on a daily basis, JonBenet was soiling the bed. And this is one of the biggest ones. She accuses Patsy she says that essentially that every time or a lot of times when she would wet the bed, Patsy would take her into the bathroom and that she would hear yelling and cries. Okay. So she is basically implying that there's some sort of potential child abuse going on related to the wet bedding.
Yeah.
The wet bedding?
Wet bedding.
Yeah.
That's what I would, that's
wet
something
bedding.
I would say. So I don't know the rate, but from my memory and anecdotal experience of the kids that are chronically urinating during their sleep or in bed, I'm going to take a guess and say that only a minority are found to traumatized and abused. And that's at least the attributable factor to their wetting the bed. But of kids that are sexually abused, their rate of wetting the bed are higher than kids that aren't being sexually abused. So people will say, oh, wetting the bed, well, that means that she's likely to be abused. If that's all you heard was wetting the bed, that would not be my assumption. It would raise a bit of a yellow flag about abuse, but again, I don't know the exact rate, but from my memory, most kids that are wetting the bed are just wetting the bed. The fact that you have a parent in the early 90s who doesn't know how to handle this situation isn't surprising to me. That you have a mom that is complicated and not helpful in the way that she approaches her daughter about this, and that the daughter would cry even if the mom was taking her aside. And because one of the strategies with kids is to tell them to get up at night or make sure they don't drink water, or make sure they go to the bathroom before they go to bed. There's various different techniques. Plus, we don't know what those conversations were. You have the housekeeper who is overhearing. It also seems like the housekeeper is trying to make a point. So there could be some motivated remembering. It could be legitimate statements. She's not necessarily lying, but she could be spinning it even in her own mind. She could be purposely spinning it. She could even be spinning it to be nicer than it actually was. Who knows? But is there a flag there of ongoing abuse? Yeah. But it's not, again, most situations, especially where you have a housekeeper that is that close, where the mom is literally asking for blowjob advice, then there would be overt indications. Unless you're going to tell me otherwise, the housekeeper would say, "I saw Patsy smack her across the face. I saw her spanking her repeatedly. I saw bruises.
Right.
I saw her smacking." Now, can it be that you would hide that? Yeah, but it's not typical.
No, totally. And no, so that's not in her book or her thing. And to your point, it could be that like one time Patsy did yell and JonBenet started crying, but that was it. But she does claim that she heard this all the time. that her, the way she puts it is that her way to discipline her was to take her in the bathroom and she would hear the screams and the cries.
Yeah, but that's a far cry from a blow to the head that would have killed her.
Right.
And then a massive sadistic cover-up of strangling her and throwing her. That's such a leap from, basically based on what you're telling me that she reports, I would assume that abuse in terms of the classic presentation isn't there. Now, I want to be clear that I'm not saying abuse didn't happen, but if we're looking at positive evidence of something happening, it's not there.
Yeah.
Could it be there? All sorts of things could have been there. We just don't know. That a lot of things happen behind closed doors, could have happened behind the scenes. It could have been a one-time event where she hit John, pushed her down the stairs, Yeah. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying there's no evidence that it did.
Yeah. She specifically talks about the following. One of the ways in which Patsy Ramsey would communicate with me was through handwritten notes, which she would leave for me with instructions for various duties around the house that needed my attention. In the 14-month period that I worked for the Ramseys, I was left several dozen handwritten notes by Patsy Ramsey. I am quite familiar with her handwriting, and I believe I can recognize it with very little difficulty. I told the grand jury that since leaving the employ of the Ramseys, I had occasion to see a copy of the ransom note. It was heartbreaking for me to admit that the handwriting in the ransom note looked very much like the handwriting Patsy used in the notes she wrote to me. By way of example, her A's are very distinctive. She would use accents over words like JonBenet and attaché. She would often use initializing of words in combination, and then she gives a few more examples. So from her perspective, just as someone that allegedly saw her handwriting a lot, she's like, yeah, that's her. Yeah, it says, I am convinced that Patsy killed and then covered up the death of her daughter. And then she goes on to essentially talking to Patsy, says, if I were speaking to Patsy, I would say, you were spent and exhausted, weren't you? The holidays do that to people. At the party on December, you appeared a little out of sorts. It's just that I'm going to skip a few things because there's a lot. If it was 5 p.m. and I was on my way out the door, leaving you without help, that makes sense why you would be stressed. So it's okay if you dipped deeply into the Beringer Chardonnay. So she's accusing her of like drinking alcohol. Your favorite wine. You loved JonBenet, but she was a handful. Wetting the bed night after night, she was driving you crazy. You were wary that night. John was no help. Because also she claims that John was barely ever around. He did nothing around the house, this kind of thing. He swallowed a couple melatonin capsules and fell deeply asleep that night. He wouldn't have heard a cannon go off. Okay, so then he goes, JonBenet wet the bed again that night, didn't she? She woke up, told you, and you took her into the bathroom. It was the same destination you always took JonBenet when it was time to punish her for bedwetting. You forget that I saw you take her there so many times before, shutting the door tightly behind you so her screams could not be heard. Except this time there was an accident, wasn't there? And then she proceeds to explain that she thinks that there was an accident and then she felt she had to cover it up. So, of course, this is not evidence. It's just that it is a kind of evidence. There is someone that spent a lot of time in their house around them, claiming she had witnessed frequent of these bathroom discipline sessions that led to screams or something like that. That is what she's claiming.
So she literally said she heard JonBenet screaming in the bathroom?
Yeah. On multiple occasions.
Okay. Well, then there's that.
That she could just, like you said, she could be making it up, or she heard it once and then she's like, oh my God, who knows?
Yeah.
But the claim, and she made this claim, according to her, to the grand jury, is that she would hear this happen.
She would hear JonBenet screaming in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And, the cop's theory was that this is basically what happened. He didn't go as far as like make it for sure that it was bedwetting, but he said that's what could have happened.
Yeah. So I've been on the record that I'm 50-50, and of the 50% that the parents did it, or one of the parents did it, this would be one of the possible narratives that could have resulted in an accidental child abuse killing of the child, and then a very weird cover-up that either the father knew about or didn't know about. So it's definitely a possibility. Of the possibilities, this is definitely a possibility, but without evidence.
Yeah. So in the end, the cop theory that we heard from the guy who quit and protested, was basically this: that Patsy flew into a fit of rage accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, but either way, like. JonBenet suffered a nearly deadly blow to the head, and then the cover-up, everything else was covered. I also personally, as I've mentioned before, found a lot of very odd things and inconsistent things with John's statements and things about what the window and the broken window. But it's hard to know if that was him covering for his own crime, or him covering for Patsy, or him covering for Burke, or Patsy and him both covering for Burke, right? Because that's the other version of the story.
Or the two of them covering for misremembering earlier and making statements that were documented, that if they're innocent and they forgot, like about the pineapple in the, fit of all the trauma that's happening in the moment, they're like, we didn't give her pineapple last night. And then the next day they're like, oh shit, we did give her pineapple.
Right.
But if we say it was us, is that going to throw all of our memory into question? So we just have, it's not a big deal. We'll just say that, we'll just continue to say it wasn't us, the pineapple, and we'll tell Burke, don't talk about the pineapple.
Right.
They just proceed with that, and they don't really realize that 30 years later, people are going to be, the pineapple,
right. And that's possible. Now, I will tell you what I think a lot of folks, probably including myself, lean in the direction of a Burke accident of some sort, and the parents covering, maybe, is that the indictment from the grand jury suggested that the parents placed their daughter in a situation that posed a threat to her life, and then assisted in concealing the crime and protecting the killer.
Right. The bat being outside the house is not necessarily something, because if you're playing with your bat outside and it just gets left outside and then it snows later, because of the botched investigation, I'm guessing they couldn't date the bat. Someone might have just grabbed it or something without taking a picture. But it is a possible narrative that Burke used the bat, hit her over the head, and maybe even they thought she was dead.
Yeah.
And then they decided to try to make it look like she was strangled, but then in the process might have actually, the coroner said that she would have died from the head injury anyway. So again, no evidence. It's just a story.
Well, no evidence that you and I have seen anyways. Yeah.
Right. The grand jury might have seen it, but I don't know. I'm just going to take a guess and say that by this point there might have been some. So of the possible things that happened, any one of the family members could have been the one to accidentally injure her. And anyone, aside from Burke doing the cover-up, although given how weird the cover-up was, but it would point towards the mom being at least one of them because of the note. Is that possible? Unfortunately, these sort of ththings do happen.
Yeah, and
you can see the parents thinking that they're being altruistic, because they're like, well, what's done is done. We have to save our child. It was an accident. And so they feel totally, they're not psychopathic. They're not pathological liars. And they're dedicated to making sure that the arrow isn't pointed at them because they love their son, you know?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So it is, to me, that one always felt like it explains some things. It doesn't explain everything, but explains some things. Like, because I kept thinking, okay, if John was the abuser and Patsy knows this, and even in interviews, because there's this interview where they ask her and she goes like, if I thought that was the case, I wouldn't be doing this interview. Okay, fine. But she could just be saying, but, she could be a victim herself. She could be scared. Who knows? But that, even in the police interviews, like I saw a lot of footage where I just like, doesn't seem to me. It doesn't mean it can't be. But so I always doubted that John actually was both the abuser and the killer, because Patsy, I just felt like, why would Patsy go along with it? But who knows? And then also that Patsy flew into a fit of rage, killed her and stuff. The only way that one worked for me was if John actually kind of didn't know. But then he was so weird with so many of the other little details about the window. So I'm like, And then John is still, after all these years, actively working with investigators to try to find the killer. It's kind of like the OJ thing, but OJ wasn't really doing that. He said he was doing that, whereas John seems to still be doing that. And Patsy's dead, so
if he were to admit that it was Patsy, then one, he would have committed a crime.
Yeah,
and
that's
two,
right.
they would absolutely now wonder about him because
But the crime is past the statute of limitations.
right. But he not murder, right?
No, not murder. But if he wasn't the murderer, if he was just an accessory, that's past.
Yeah, but you know, he has all the reasons in the world. So it's not evidence.
Yeah. No, I know. None of this is hard. It's just kind of when I think through it, I'm like, if I'm putting, my bets, I'm going to allocate $100, right? Okay.
Well, wait, no. I think a better way to look at it is you have $100. How much money would you bet on anything? Because if you're very sure, you put $100. But if you're not very sure,
do a spread. Can I put a little? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to put $10 on John. I'm going to put...
And then she helps cover it up. Patsy helps cover it up. Who writes the note?
No. John's the whole...
He does the whole thing.
He fakes her handwriting. Patsy's in the dark.
Why would he fake her handwriting?
Because he wants to... Plausible deniability, because she's not guilty, so they're not going to be able to tie her to it.
But why not emulate just...
Because he doesn't have other samples of handwriting, but he's got her handwriting. Right. That's why it's only $10.
Okay.
I'm putting $40 on Patsy.
Oh.
$40. I'm putting $50 on Burke.
Really? Wow.
But I have no data. No, and here's the bottom line.
Wait, so according to this thought experiment, even though you're not confident, you're willing to waste all 100 of your dollars? You're just
it's just $100.
But you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Yeah.
I mean, so you're not
fine.
using the...
How about 30 on Patsy and 40 on Burke? And I'll keep a little bit of the money.
But still, like, that implies very confident.
I am very confident that it was an inside job. And
you're very confident that and you're pretty sure
one
that
or
Patsy
several
was
of the
involved.
Ramses, yeah.
You're pretty sure that Patsy was involved somehow.
Yeah. And why? Ultimately, it comes down to this. Number one, I'm going to not trust, but I'm going to put some weight on the grand jury's indictments. Okay. Number one. Number two.
I think that's sound, by the way.
Yeah. Number two, when I look at the evidence we've talked about, I can't reasonably point the finger at a specific intruder that we looked at. So if it is an intruder, it's still some mystery intruder. And the story, I told the kind of the nice or the charitable version, but the full version goes something like the intruder who knows them, but not well enough to where he can be really connected, breaks in without leaving any trace of anything, waits, figures out that there's this $118,000, writes this very specific note, never intending to really collect the money because they really have these sexual appetites. But the sexual appetites are actually, in the scale of things, very minor and very specific, mostly induced or involving choking and maybe some irritation of the genital area. And then when things go wrong or because they just wanted to,
for the record,
hits them in the head.
For the record, the autopsy didn't indicate to me, I mean, I'm not a medical expert, it didn't sound like minor irritation. It sounded like actual very obvious injury.
But it didn't see, and there's no semen or anything. And then hits over the head at about the same time, and then escapes again with no trace, and is never found. And there's no more leads on any legible. Okay, so when I do that, I'm like, yeah, it doesn't sound as plausible. That said, if I had maybe another $100, I might bet a little bit on Oliva. Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, and so, but then when I go back to the evidence and I think about the inconsistencies in the stories about the window, and then the weirdness of the note, and the fact that it's their pad, their thing, that the handwriting seems to match according to a lot of experts. One thing that I underplayed, by the way, is the expert that said that he was pretty convinced it was Patsy, the guy who initially wrote to Patsy expressing his support, but later said that, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was her. He wasn't just some random expert. He had actually done, he was already famous for doing things like identifying historical handwritings that no one could figure out, like all these things, so other murders that he had, So, I place some value on that. And finally, my final bit is that I believe that the one person that they tried to frame that also would have been an inside job was, or not frame, but the one person that they pointed to that would have been an inside job was the housekeeper. And that I just don't believe that the housekeeper would have needed to come back so hard and even write a book just because some comments were thrown her way with zero evidence, and the cops weren't even looking at her as a legitimate suspect. So in the end, I wrap all that up and I'm like, yeah, I guess if I'm betting my $100, I'm betting them on the Ramseys distributed, and I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a break. The rest of this episode will be for patrons, and I will make my bets. What do you say?
Bets. Sounds good.
So become a patron. Otherwise, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.